Good news, great stories, real impact. It's all here on the Social Impact Show.
It would help if I switch on the microphone. It's Lee Cole with Do You Still Care? And before that, we had Asha with Jailer. Two great songs on 919. It's Johannesburg's official feel-good radio station with me, Sam Marshall. We carry you through from 9 to 12, Mondays to Fridays. It's all about positive news. Now, you know what? There are very few people in the world that I find fascinating. I watch and I follow a lot of people, but there are very few people in the world that I find absolutely fascinating. And the interesting thing about this particular person we're about to interview is I've seen her dialoguing, I've seen her communicate, and it's a weird thing to say when somebody has balance in how they engage, because sometimes we have come with the biases into conversations. And I think Dr. Robyn Whitaker always seems to find a balance in how she articulates the questions, how she wants to engage with you. And I know I'm putting a lot on you, but it's interesting when you are in public spaces or you conversate. There's a warmness to how you speak. There's a warmness to how you engage. And I mean, now we're about to talk about your event on the 6th of December, which I think is, I'm not going to take your shine away. I'm going to let you explain what it is. But on the 6th of December is this historical event that you're facilitating. But just quickly before we even get there, just you have a deep appreciation for the power of dialogue.
Thank you, Sam. That's a really kind introduction and very generous of you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I think that dialogue is an unbelievably powerful force and a rather underutilized one. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. People are really starting to understand how powerful it is to not step into debate or what so many of us think of as dialogue, which is really just coming from your position and presenting your position, perhaps letting somebody else shift your thinking a little bit, but really to step past that form of dialogue into what we term at Africa Voices dialogue, generative dialogue, which is really about stepping into flow and practicing the art of paying exquisite attention to the people that you're engaging with and listening beyond the words that they're saying, and then also listening from a larger space than your own particular positionality.
Because that's easy for us to do, right? It's so easy to be able to listen from your position. And over the last couple of weeks, I listened to a lot of debate online. And there was this, I can't get his name now, but there was this podcast that was talking that, or saying that, I think it was on the Piers Morgan show, and he was saying that we sometimes use words and data to reinforce our position and not to go into the great beyond and actually challenge our position. Do you see that sometimes that people do that, where they listen a particular way to say, well, I'm right?
Absolutely. I think that much of the time we really have, I won't say we have lost it, but we have forgotten a lot of the skill around really listening to understand, to comprehend, to feel into others' realities, and we listen very much when we're in conversation with each other, and particularly when we feel very strongly about a topic, we listen very much from our headspace. And from your headspace, what you're doing is processing data and utilizing the bits to really make your own case. And where you come up against bits of data that you don't like, really looking for arguments against them. And generative dialogue asks for us to do something else, which is to really suspend that criticism, judgment, fear. A lot of the dialogue where we are trying to better one another or persuade each other of our particular stance and viewpoint comes from a place of control and fear. Generative dialogue comes from a completely different kind of mindset, of intention, and it comes from an intention to really listen from a space of love, listen from a space of curiosity and compassion and interest, and not feeling that you need to persuade the other person, but really listening in for what is it that your perspective is, and how do I embrace that without feeling the need to necessarily persuade you or be persuaded myself, but that we can see each other, mirror each other, and see ourselves in our own positions better, and develop the depth of our understanding. So it is interesting because it has a lot to do with the concept which is become quite prevalent in terms of languaging lately, of safe and brave space. Mm-hmm. So it's the ability to be in spaces with other where you've spent enough time and you've been intentional enough about building the level of relationship, and you coming into the conversation with a will to be in relationship, not to be superior or to be right. Yeah.
But that sounds complex to me, though. It sounds difficult to go into conversations vulnerable, and you're asking us to not, or at least be able to conversate in a way that is reflective of both people's value in the conversation. And that is sometimes very, very, very difficult. And it's even more difficult when one is heated, or when one is emotional, or when one is coming from a point of departure in see me, hear me, engage with me, because I think then that obviously that's already a vulnerability, but the value and the quality of the dialogue then is almost under stress or duress.
Yeah, these are skills that we actually need to practice, and I always say it's a really interesting phenomenon, because I do a lot of this kind of work.
You do it around the world. So.
Yeah, it's the heart of our work that we do at Africa Voices Dialogue. Is really the commitment that we have is a commitment to creating spaces where people feel seen, heard, and loved, and where we can really have an experience of what it means to be in a community of care and belonging, and how that shifts our capacity to think well. And I'm always astounded, and I'm astounded by the fact that I'm always astounded. But I think about this work as both the easiest thing in the world and the hardest thing in the world to do. It is the easiest thing in the world because when human beings experience a space within which they are genuinely seen, heard, and loved, where they are in an experience of generative dialogue, they are being paid attention to, they recognize it. So we instantly recognize that feeling. It's wonderful. It's we know it. Even if we've never experienced it, we're hardwired for this. So human beings, really recognize that experience. But to recreate that experience for others is the hardest thing, because what it asks for is that we let our guard down, and that we actually voluntarily engage in spaces with our own vulnerability, and we completely shift the mindset in which we come into conversation, and that's what we find tremendously hard. So that work, a large group of the people doing this kind of work have a term that they've developed around this kind of work, which is weaving. And it's not leadership work, it's weaving work. Weaving work means the ability to pay attention.
You think about a basket, the same way you weave intricate, it's all kind of connected. The total sum of the work creates the basket.
That's right. So and it's paying attention to what lies between people, or between systems, or between component parts of things, and how that quality of what is happening between us, how very powerful it is in terms of what is being created through us and by us. And these skills of paying attention to what are the conditions in which we are choosing to be together, are really important skills, but really undervalued in our current kind of the modernity phase that we're in. They are not new skills to us as human beings.
Yeah, they're not.
But they are forgotten skills, perhaps. And they're not new in terms of a lot of community-based work. So wherever there's community-based work, you have quite high skill around this ability to hold people in relationship.
Because you need it. Without it, you can't plan, you can't build, you can't do anything. Yeah.
But when we move into structure, we seem to lose this capacity, and it's the capacity that needs, I think, to be built for the phase that our world is in at the moment.
So, Doc, why do you think that we are, and based on just what you said, I mean, the skills exist, we have it, but why do you think we are becoming less, maybe not less willing to engage, but I think we do engage, but we engage in different ways now. And I do think that we have the ability to, depending on our circle of friends and who we are with, to easily conversate and dialogue. And the reason I want to keep it very simplistic is because we have listeners right now that sometimes, conversations are strained. Sometimes conversations are not the quality conversation. Sometimes you sit with a partner and there's something between you, and you're in an organization and you feel your voice has been stifled. Why do you think have we lost the ability to dialogue?
I don't think we've lost it. I think we don't practice it. I think we don't value it. I think we haven't been explicit enough about recognizing that these are skills that really matter, and therefore we need to take where there is inherent capacity, and we need to grow those skills. We need to really support them. We need to create roles that actually allow for organizations to have people who are not tasked with this, who are not doing it as an extra. So every organization has what I would term a weaver in it, or many weavers, but typically they would have another role. So they will be the PA, but everybody knows that this is the person to go to when I need to get something done, because she knows who has those skills, because she's willing to be generous with her connecting of resources, because she's willing to think with me. This is somebody I can go and just spend some time asking her to let me think into her space. And these are the things that I think we need to refocus and become much more intentional around building capacity for people to connect, for relationships to develop, for practicing the quality of attention that we're paying to each other. I think there is such a drive, and there has been, this is an issue not of anybody's fault, it's an issue of modernity around this constant push to productivity and output, without the recognition that before you can get to productivity and output, you need to be thinking well. And the only way to think well is to think into space with people who are treating you well while you're thinking. When people treat us well when we are busy thinking, our thinking becomes creative. When people treat us poorly, our thinking becomes guarded. We resist. We don't say what we really feel. We don't step into the courage
that
of being honest about
the backlash.
That's it.
And it's so interesting that you say that, Doc, because John Sanai, the futurist, right? He's talking about building a future-forward business. And he argues that there's two distinctive roles. You cannot have the current person dealing with the day-to-day operations also tasked with the idea of what's coming 5-10 years from now. That's a different skill set. That's a different team. And it's interesting to me that you highlighted in a roundabout manner that you can't have the person who starts with being the PA also then, they might have weaver-like skills, but it's not their day-to-day job, so they can't immerse themselves into what it takes to be a complete and total weaver, because they've got a functional job to do. Precisely. And I think that is what I sometimes feel that is where this idea of multitasking, or being what they used to term a year ago, the slashy generation, slash this, slash that. I think that's where it falls short, because in 2024, 2025 and 2026, as AI and technology takes more and more jobs, takes more and more people's spaces, it's going to be these very thought out conversations that's going to save someone's life, that's going to save a family's life, that's going to save a business. It's not going to be the job, because a lot of us are rooted in what we do. It's who we are as people. I'm a credit controller, so I'm a credit controller. I'm a CEO. But we need these dialogues. I think we need them even more now than we did even 10, 15 years ago, when technology wasn't everything, when we weren't sitting on our phones for 17, 18 hours self-isolating. Because how much value can you get out of a phone? I mean, how many videos can you watch? How much YouTube can you watch? How many movies can you watch? You would need to be able to develop these conversational skills at a corporate level, but also at an interpersonal level between your family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a critical skill growth space that we are in now. I really, really do. I feel that, we talk about critical competencies, and we talk about all of these skill sets that we need as though they can be in some mandatory way enforced, but actually all of the skills that we know we need for future, they're relational. They're relational. They're around our relationship, our capacity.
And that's what the experts tell us.
That's right. And it's not the soft and fuzzy relationality. It's relationality at every level. It's what is the quality of our interior relationality? How are we engaging with the world outside and around us? What is the quality of the attention that we're able to pay? How do we really grow our capacity for high quality thinking? Because high quality thinking is not an independent, it's not an individual phenomenon. Actually, the best quality thinking happens relationally. And so to grow this capacity for relationality across the full spectrum of the things that we engage with, not only other human beings, how do we relate our interior world to our exterior world? How do we relate our family life to our more than family life? How do we relate to the environment around us? How are we paying attention? And so, it's been very interesting. I've been doing this work very explicitly for the past 5 years, but probably the past 10, 15 years, and then much longer before that. I think there is personality characteristic that sort of lends one to this role. But what I've really recognized is that it's not that we have a shortage of models and methods and tools. We actually have a lot of models and methods of tools around this. What we have a shortage of is
very beginner level to expert level.
What we have a shortage of is the capacity, the ability to practice them constantly, congruently, continuously, regularly, so that they're forming part of how we are being made up as human beings. And probably the biggest thing that we need to be thinking about is how clear is our intention? What is the intent with which we are approaching each other? Are we spending enough time clarifying how we want to be together? And then are we practicing the way in which we pay attention? And so going right back to this question, it's both the easiest thing in the world and the hardest thing in the world. I think that the reason that we do our work with Africa Voices Dialogue, the reason that I do the work that I do in other spaces, is because one can really see that if you create the opportunity to practice this way of being, it shifts the way collectives start thinking. And if you give it long enough and you hold it for long enough, it actually changes people's capacity to diffuse that way of being into their own environments. And so, we really need to move past this, a facilitator coming in to run a workshop on attention or on communication or on culture, And we need to start thinking about how do we embed these capacities societally? How do we really start shifting our collective capacity to be intentional about being in relationship, about hosting these spaces where the conditions which are being created allow for us to connect well with each other.
Yeah. And it brings me back to earlier this year. I held a conference and you were one of the speakers. And there's something so amazing that you said that stuck with me. It was that this can't be kind of a one-way street where you have a bunch of people speaking, but we need to create a couple of hours space for people to authentically be able to engage with each other. Because then the value of this is it's kind of you're dumping stuff on people, but you're not allowing them to be able to engage with the content, be able to think through that. And then either because there was quite it was an esteemed panel, you were part of it, but in the audience themselves we had some serious thinkers. And I love that, to say that, listen, this can't be just a dumping thing, but we actually have to create spaces where and then we can't put a time limit to it. Because when you put a time limit to it, I mean, obviously time is a factor and it's important, but when you say to somebody, well, you've only got 7 minutes to ask questions, it doesn't allow for people to be able to authentically immerse themselves and be able to reflect.
Yeah, no, that's right, Sam. And there's this beautiful, a dear friend of mine, we were talking about this phenomenon of what happens when generative dialogue takes place is that time expands. So it's really when groups of people are in a state of generative dialogue together, it's an experience of collective flow, and it's a remarkable experience where actually the chronological amount of time that you're spending together has almost evaporates, because in the moment the experience of what is unfolding within individuals and between individuals kind of expands that sense of time. And this friend of mine was saying that, interestingly, in Greek, in ancient Greek articulation of time, they have 2 words that they use. They use the word chronos, which is to do with our calendar time, the clock time, getting stuff done, being efficient, etc. And then there is kairos time. And kairos time is the movement of change.
Wow.
And it's the movement of shifting mindsets, and it's seasonality, and it's agrarian. It's not about how we control and manage what happens. It's about how we sense our way into what is moving through us and align with it. And that's the experience of generative dialogue, where people, so many of our dialogues, we invite speakers to come to our Africa Voices dialogue spaces, and we say it's a 3-hour dialogue, and everybody's like, well, what?
3 hours?
You have a 3-hour dialogue. I can promise you we've never had a dialogue where people have left or have said this was just too much. There is always, by the end of it, this hunger for more connection. And the shifts that happen in those 3 hours are profound, completely life-changing shifts that happen for people because of this experiential feeling of what it feels like to be in an environment where high-quality attention is present.
Doc, I'm gonna stop you there, because we're gonna have this conversation after 10 o'clock. After 10 o'clock, we'll focus on what's happening on the 6th of December. There's this historical event happening online. Everybody's welcome to join. But we're going to talk about the critical topic of the historical and educational connection between historically black colleges and universities in the USA and the African tertiary institutions. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Robyn Whitaker. We'll play a song, go to the news, and then we'll talk about the main reason she's here. But I have a habit of exploiting her. Whenever I see her, I want to have a chat about the quality of dialogue before we talk business. So when we come back after 10, we'll talk business. But I think it's important for us to be able to to kind of, what I love about you is that you're focused on it. You think about the quality of dialogue. It's the work that you did with Symphonia. It's the work that you do on the African continent. It's the work that you do globally. And you speak at so many events. So I thought it would be interesting for our listeners just to be able to, if you're sitting in a car, if you're on your way somewhere, if you're sitting with your partner, to think about what is the level and the quality of dialogue between you. If you're going into work, if you think about that, are you the weaver, as Dr. Robyn Whitaker was saying? And how do we then make sure that these weavers are developed in a way that they can truly facilitate these meaningful dialogues? And especially as we change now in 2024, and as the advent of technology and technology changing, disrupting our lives, how do we get into a space where we can authentically engage with each other? Okay, more conversation when we come back after the news.
Good news, great stories, real impact. It's all here on the Social Impact Show.
It's the Social Impact Show with me, Sam Marshall. What we do Mondays to Friday is share the stories that are important, that matter. It's about driving brand South Africa forward, and that's why I love doing this. It's in line with socialtv.co.za and what we do there. And that's really how 919 and Social TV merges, is around driving impactful stories, getting South Africans to see the value of brand South Africa. And I hope you do with the show. We deeply appreciate you. I appreciate you for joining us every day, Mondays to Fridays. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to listen to these voices, these people that are fanatical about changing not just the discourse of South Africa, but changing lives and communities and stuff like that. But before we continue our conversation with Dr. Robyn Whitaker, and I promise I'll stop having an interview for my sake. We'll talk about the December 6th event that's coming up. But before that, let's have a chat quickly. Since 1986, they've built impactful programs based on research and decades of experience. Your support matters, so donate quickly and securely at tbc.org.za using Apple Pay or Samsung. Now, the Teddy Bear Foundation is committed to ending child abuse and protecting children's rights. Even a small contribution can help provide life-saving services and create safer communities. Together, let's break the cycle of abuse and give every South African child the chance to thrive.
Feel the music. Feel the joy. 919.
Okay, we continue our conversation with Dr. Robyn Whitaker. She is facilitating a fascinating conversation on the 6th of December. I'm going to let you tell her, well, she'll tell you all about it. But essentially, it is between two countries, South Africa, or I should say is between the USA and the African continent, because you work on the African continent. But in your own words, Doc, what's happening on the 6th of December?
So we've got a really exciting event coming up on the 6th of December. It is the 31st of our Africa Voices Dialogues.
31st?
So this is the 31st dialogue. We've run 31 dialogues, about 14 different workshops, and then we've just actually completed our first Education for Africa Dialogic Summit.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I tell you, it's been amazing. But so this particular dialogue is really exciting because I think it brings in a connectivity between people who care about the African continent and how human development, learning and thriving is happening on the African continent that might be slightly, for those of us who sit in Africa, slightly sort of outside of what we would normally think about, but which is hugely, hugely relevant. And so this particular dialogue we couldn't easily incorporate in our Dialogic Summit. It was originally going to be taking place when we ran our Dialogic Summit last month. But because of the time differences with the States and our continent, and because of the caliber of the individuals who were participating, we didn't feel that we could make them get up at 1 o'clock in the morning to run this particular session.
I agree with you.
So this is a sister event to the summit. And it is a dialogue between the provosts or vice chancellors and academic leaders of a number of historically black colleges and universities in the United States, and leaders of a number of academic institutions on the African continent. And it's a really exciting opportunity to look at how do we build closer connections, synergies, syntheses, how do we really foreground how do we really foreground the quality and caliber of education that's happening on the African continent, and take the narrative coming out of the African continent around knowledge production, around indigenous knowledge systems, around the way that learning and education is happening on this continent, which actually is very exciting. There's a huge amount of development in terms of new thinking about how we reach youth, and with obviously the African youth demographic. What does education look like in this context? What does creating the conditions for human thriving look like in this context? And how do we partner with people who really care enormously deeply and who have had a very significant historical influence on the continent?
Just to jump in there, Doc, just based on what you said, has this conversation in this manner happened before?
Yes, it does. It has happened. So we are partnering with a fantastic entity called Global Impact Industries, as well as the Pan-African Council, to bring this dialogue to the fore. And Global Impact Industries is based in the States, and they really have an enormous focus on connecting the African diaspora with the continent and on facilitating these kinds of conversations and connecting opportunities. Likewise, the Pan-African Council. And, it's really interesting because I know for myself, let me not speak for everybody, but I know for myself, this really wasn't a huge point of awareness for me in understanding quite how connected a vast number of people around the world feel to Africa, not in the sense of wanting to help Africa out, but how strongly their identity and their desire for the thriving of this continent exists in their day-to-day activities. So interestingly, the African diaspora is now about 170 million strong, and it's actually been classified as Region 6 of the African Union. So recognizing that, from historical slave trade, from immigration, from how the continent's citizens historically have been dispersed across the globe and yet have such a strong sense of identification with the needs of the continent and a strong desire to be connected more meaningfully into the continent and to benefit Africa. And so this dialogue specifically, it's not the first. There has been a huge amount of work that's happened, but it is, I think, interesting in that we are not looking at this dialogue in the sense of making plans and projects. At this point, what we're really doing is wanting to grow the connection, the relationality, the capacity for really seeing what's out there, who's out there, connecting people from these historically black colleges and universities, and a number of black students associations. So there's one of our colleagues is going to bring the Canadian Black Students Association into the dialogue as well, and facilitating real connection between human beings, not connection only between entities. So
and institutions,
at an institutional level.
If you are having a dialogue, and I think it's interesting that you did not add, or you as a collective did not add the pressure of wanting to have outcomes based on this conversation, but to really build the connection, right? I think that's very, very interesting, because often I find with these conversations that there needs to be almost an outcome and an agenda to it that advances something. But the idea here that the advancement or the value or the success of this is the connections that you build and sharing your experiences means that also to a large degree it's finding, maybe I think, which is sometimes too obvious, is that it's developing actual connection in terms of shared stories, shared experiences, and hoping then that each of these different parties will then be able to leave this conversation with going, well, in actual fact, their challenges are not too dissimilar to ours, and that we can in future maybe connect from a point where we have a deeper understanding of what Africa is about in terms from its education, what the Canadian society is about, what the historical black colleges are about in the US. And I do think there's commonalities there, but I don't think that's obvious, because if you don't have these kind of conversations, you can't see it.
It precisely, and this is the point. So yes, we are very interested in the potential for collaboration.
Yeah.
But what we're interested in not in project management kind of collaboration. We're interested in the capacity for co-creation and for finding each other and for really listening into the independent realities that people experience, but then also where is the point of connection? Where is the system speaking to us about what the possibilities are? And the truth is, possibility and connection travels through relationship. And so spending time finding each other, hearing each other, really slowing down that rush to get to a specific product, and to rather discover what is wanting to happen, where is the energy lying, what excites us, where is the individual who, when they spoke, it just landed in me, and I'm going to reach out and connect with them, and committing to really seeking that shared experience together and the shared understanding that develops through conversation. And so yes, there are a lot of opportunities about what could come out, but we don't predicate what has to come out. We rather explore together what we're experiencing, what our own realities are, where the energy starts to come through around this would be a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
And we really foreground that connection and relationship first. The other will follow.
Yeah. Can you then, based on this dialogue that's happening on the 6th, that's open to the public, can you then build concrete steps, or can concrete steps then be taken to integrate Pan-Africanism into academic departments, leadership, student activities in both historically black universities and African universities?
Absolutely, and I think I think that there is already a large amount of that underway. Yeah. I think it's about how do we strengthen the ties and connections and bonds, how do we learn from each other, how do we strengthen our thinking about what does Pan-Africanism mean, what does an Africanization rather than a decolonization process look like.
Yeah.
How do we mirror to each other what's happening in each of our spaces, and so collectively strengthen what's happening collectively in this conversation.
And I love when you said co-creation, because I think when you co-create, there isn't a master and a servant. It is we have so much to offer, and you have a lot to offer, so let's kind of meet in the middle, and not one is better than the other. Because I do think that often these conversations, and not to say that Americans are arrogant, but there is sometimes there's a sense of superiority, what's that word? Or supremacy, whatever the word is. Somebody feels superior in the conversation, and I love the co-creation, because if you co-create, you have to be open to the other person's thoughts, ideas, experiences and processes that have been put in place.
No, absolutely. And I think so the thing with really stepping into generative dialogue and paying attention in the way that we've spoken about earlier on is that one of the most powerful things that it does is it dismantles limiting assumptions. It dismantles the assumptions that we have about each other, and those assumptions are two-way. So,
yeah, for sure.
When you talk about, okay, we're going to have this conversation, there from one aspect there may be an immediate kind of defensiveness. From another aspect there may be an immediate kind of attitude of a different sort. And and if we don't dismantle those assumptions, we actually don't get to real relationships and substance. And so the process of generative dialogue, of really listening into each other, it's an immersion experience, and it's an experience where we think we know something, and then we go and we actually immerse ourselves into it, and we open ourselves. So there is a real willingness to become open, to open your mind, to open your heart, to open your will, to step in without prejudgment, without your assumptions, and to listen with a completely open mind, not to correct or interject, but to really hear what experiences are like for other people.
And Doc, I just want to. So there's somebody sitting right now listening to this conversation, going, "The 6th of December sounds absolutely great, but what are the actual benefits for South Africa being part of a conversation like this, which is a global conversation?" And I love the fact that you are always involved in projects that pushes brand South Africa forward.
Oh, so I think, look, I think this is a specifically pan-continental dialogue. It's wonderful that South Africa has a role. Actually, our Africa Voices dialogue work is, what's really beautiful about it is that the representation is very strong. So our 3 co-founders, my colleague Abdelaziz Zuri is from Morocco, and my other colleague Andrew Wambua is from Kenya, and then myself from South Africa, and then our community is from right across the continent, and there's this beautiful sense of connectedness, which is rare on the African continent. And I think it is an honor to be able to sit in the South African space. I think there are a lot of assumptions. South Africa has a lot of assumptions about its role on the continent, and I think there are a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of history that sits here, and I think the opportunity to engage on an equal platform with each other, and to really listen in, for South Africans to listen to what's happening in the DRC or Sierra Leone or Ethiopia or the Congo, and to really see the commonalities that sit there, and to feel more integrated into the continent is incredible, and likewise that opportunity to expand our horizons of belonging, to also see that the African diaspora are relevant and important. They belong to us also. There is a connection, and so we can do away, I think, with a lot of the assumptions about what is the motivation with which people are approaching, and rather listen for it. And listen for what's really there, not for what we assume is there. And in the process of listening, even those motivations shift. So just one, this concept, it's a bomb dialogue is a particular approach to dialogic work. And what he speaks about dialogue is the opportunity for us to have a proprioception of thought. So to understand where our thoughts sit in space and time. When we don't dialogue, we lose that understanding of where does our thinking sit in space and time. How does it relate to others? How does it relate to what else is out there? And so, the willingness to practice generative dialogue really helps us to let our own thinking evolve and change because of what it bumps up against, and what it sees, and how that process enlarges our world.
I love that. We're coming towards the end, Doc. People that want to be part of the conversation on the 6th, that want to listen into the African Dialogue series, how can they engage?
So our RSVP form is really, it's fairly simple. It's on a bit.ly link, so it's www.bit.ly/AVD_31.
Okay.
And so that's
African Voices Dialogue.
African, If they would like to follow us on LinkedIn, they can also find the the invitation on LinkedIn. It's just Africa Voices Dialogue on LinkedIn. And then they can also have a look at our website, which is www.africavoicesdialogue.africa. And on the website, there is a form to just join our join our mailing list.
Yeah.
And once they're on the
and
mailing
there's some
list,
really, really great content that you and your team generate. Dr. Robyn Whitaker, thank you very much for joining me in studio. And our first conversation, first half was, I felt, incredibly valuable in the ability to dialogue efficiently and coming from a space of openness as opposed to prejudging conversations and using conversation to affirm one's own ideas. And then for your event on the 6th of December, it's very, very simple. www.africanvoicesdialogue.africa. And also, by the way, if you really want to find out more about Dr. Robyn Whitaker, go to LinkedIn. It's Dr. Robyn Whitaker on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to just follow. She has amazing insights. Okay, we leave it there. We continue our conversations after our break. But you're listening to 919, Johannesburg's official feel-good radio station.
Good news, great stories, real impact. It's all here on the Social Impact Show.